Communication fundamentally it's always at least two messages. There's what you want to say, and then there's the message that is received. You have to do this somewhat habitually, because if you only do it periodically, people are like, what's happening? Am I in trouble? Are you going to identify your own identity, or are you going to allow others? And sometimes it's not up to you. Do you remember the show in like the 90s, Alf? Okay, so for listeners who are not familiar, Alf was an alien, and he looked like not like a green alien, but he was like a cartoon, like like a brown aardvark, kind of.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and I have Erica Barnhardt with me today. How are things out on the West Coast?
Things are splendiferous on the West Coast. There's sunshine. And when you're I'm in the Northwest, so I'm based in Seattle, and whenever it's winter and there's sunshine, it's a good day.
Whoa. So is it true like rains there all the time in Seattle?
Okay, here's the truth of it. It is often quite gray and drizzly, but like the volume of rain compared to many other places is not very impressive. It kind of like, it's like a slow roll. But I would say the thing that gets most of us down, including myself to some extent, is that it's gray a lot of the time. Like it's overcast. Yeah. And day after day of overcast gets, you're kind of like, okay. And we're just, north enough that it gets dark pretty early in the winter. And so now we're all psyched because the sun is setting after 5 p.m. and it's rising closer and closer to 7. And I'm a total morning person. So in the winter, there's a long stretch of time where I'm up and doing my morning stuff, and it's dark, like pitch dark. But that's okay with me. I like mornings no matter what.
Now you said your morning stuff. So we're just going to dive in. What does that mean? What is the morning stuff?
Yeah. So the morning stuff is, whenever I share this, I have to be honest, I feel like a middle-aged white woman cliche. I got to be like really honest, because it is journaling. I mean, we'll probably talk about my love of language and the role it plays in my life and my work. So I journal first thing. I wake up, I make a cup of tea, I journal. If I feel called, I meditate. I don't meditate all the time. It's kind of like if I need to access something from my subconscious that I can't through journaling, then I'll do that. And then then there's some physical therapy exercises that need to happen, it turns out, every morning. So kind of like, so I just sort of get my body moving, and then I'm ready for the day.
And so why do you think that's important? There's a bunch of different perspectives out there. One, just go right into work. One, check your phone. One, don't look at your phone. One, journal. One, meditate. Like there's all these different ideas out there on how to move into the day. How'd you pick yours?
I mean, my question for folks who are noodling through what should my morning ritual be, or my sequence of events, my question is, what's going to set you up for success for your day?
Okay. And
so that's why I don't always meditate, because there's some days I'm like, I'm good, like I've connected with self, I'm clear on my intention for the day, I'm good. So for me, it is, what are the things that I can do where, kind of honestly, if nothing else goes the way I expect or want it to in the day, it's still a successful day because I've started it out in a way that feels good to me. So it really bothers me that, also, in North American culture, early risers are really rewarded. It's like you're a better human or something. Even in high school, I woke up at 5:15. That's just my natural default setting. It just means I'm a morning person. So I really feel for folks for whom that's not true. And I feel, and this comes up, when I'm doing advising with some of my leaders, where they feel like guilty or even like tipping into shame about the fact that they don't like wake up like Tigger every morning. I'm like, well, guess what? I am useless after 8 p.m. Nothing. And I say this to my clients.
Lost her slipper.
Yeah. I'm like, I literally say, you will never get anything from me after 8 p.m. because I can't commit to like high quality work after 8 p.m. So don't be expecting it. Now you might get things from me at 5:30 in the morning, but never in the evening. And I don't check email. So I think I think that there's even a question of, do you need a morning routine? Like, does that serve you? Or maybe for you, if you're more of an evening person, what is that thing that centers you that you do in the evening? But pick the time of day where it's like, still the idea is what's going to make you feel successful and centered, like tapping into who you are and self is so important and hard, given where we're at.
So what's interesting is you kind of dropped it in. We've talked about breadcrumbs already today before the recording, and here you are dropping in the breadcrumbs. So you advise leaders? Why do they need advisors? Like, what is this thing that you're talking about?
Yeah. So you could call it coaching, you can call it strategic advising, whatever you want to call it. Interestingly, I'm not as hung up on that particular word so much as the results I get for folks. So, fundamentally, the work I do professionally is to help clients communicate with clarity and confidence. And so I'll work with leaders who, kind of know that if they improve their communication skills, and we can talk about what improve means, they would be more effective as a leader. And again, they get to define what effective means as a leader. And then with at the organizational level, messaging and external marketing. And so all words all the time. But that's what I do with leaders. And again, it all comes back to communicating with clarity and confidence, whether that's you as a leader, you as a team, or you as an organization.
So communicate, I feel like that's a really complicated word. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about communication, because I don't think it's just the words, but you dropped in communication, clarity, and confidence. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people fumble, mumble, are uncomfortable, don't want to be the center of attention, even though they're called to lead.
Yeah.
Like, let's go there, because I think that's where you truly live, and maybe the journey on how you got there and why you like being there.
So one thing that is helpful, there's so many different bunny trails we could hop down in this moment. So I'm going to try to stay focused and linear somewhat. Communication fundamentally is it's always at least two messages, right? There's what you want to say. So there's your message, what is sent, and then there's the message that is received, right? And this is what makes it complicated, right? Is so I'm talking to you, Jerome. I might have a sense of what I want you to be hearing, but I actually never know what you've heard or what has been received, right? So John Powell has this beautiful quote, which I won't get it word for word. I'll paraphrase it. He says, I can never know, I can only know what has left my mind and heart. I can never know what has landed in your mind and heart. And so my work is to ensure that what has left my mind and heart arrives in your mind and heart intact and without distortion. So this is where always did it arrive intact, or was it distorted? And the thing with communication is, yes, it is words. Words are important. It's a fundamental building block, but so is pacing, so is intonation, so is silence. All of these things factor in. And so it's so multifaceted. And, you mentioned leaders who are like, I don't want to be the center of attention. That's actually a super beautiful thing, right? So these are leaders, maybe servant leaders, people who the idea of leading from behind is very resonant for them, which is, again, that's beautiful. And also you are the leader. And so, whether or not that's little L or big L, if you are leading, there are expectations of you. And so it's not a matter of learning to communicate like someone else, like we perceive a leader to communicate. It's 100% about so what does that mean for you? How do you want to communicate? Right? Just bringing out the naturalness of how someone communicates in a way that their message can be received. So that's, I would say that one of the biggest shifts is just a lot of wondering and awareness about how something less focus on, if it's spoken, what's coming out of my mouth, and much more on how is that being received? So that, checking in a lot, it's a leadership skill. So and then we were talking about this book Jerome, The Three Laws of Performance by Steve Zaffron and Dave Logan. And I read you one quote, but can I read from this because it seems
Absolutely.
super pertinent? Okay. They say, language is the means through which your future is already written. They go on to say, untying the knots, what they refer to as the knots of language, begins with seeing that whenever you say something, other communication is carried along with it. We call this phenomenon the unsaid but communicated. And I think for leaders, this is so critical. Whether or not you're leading in your personal life or your professional life, right? So I use the term leaders very broadly, like the phenomenon of the unsaid but communicated. And I paraphrase that as what is received.
So this one's really interesting for me because I think, particularly women, they're looking for that part, the unsaid, right? And
Yeah, we are biologically,
interpreting,
neurologically tuned in. 100%.
they're interpreting things that may not have ever been thought of by the other person are read by the woman. And I've always found it interesting because one of my rules is no sarcasm.
Ooh, that's a good
No
one.
sarcasm, because I think communication is difficult enough. So to say something and expect somebody to pick up on something other than the words, I don't know if it's fair. But we do it all the time, and then we complicate it, and then we wonder why there's confusion when we say something we don't actually mean it. That's
With
a struggle for
sarcasm,
me.
Jerome?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Or, it's kind of a jab and it's like, oh, I was just kidding. Like the text with the LOL on the end, that was mean. Like you meant all of it, but you put the LOL on the end because you thought that made it okay. But going to like no sarcasm in just in personal relationships, like I always think about the five, like there is no sarcasm for me to them. And I don't want you to think about it. I don't want it to be any harder. And if I say it and some of the other stuff that gets communicated isn't congruent with it, you can ask a clarifying question, but the answer is going to be the same. For me, in particular, I worked really hard at that congruency piece of the words actually being what's important. So I say all that to say, for the listener out there who's questioning whether or not I'm a good communicator, it isn't just about the cadence. What would you say would make them somebody who communicates with clarity? Because I think that's part of it. Maybe confidence is the other part of it. But what would make them a good or a great communicator? Because I think it's really important to get the message across.
You'd have to ask how, like, right? So if you walk into whatever you walk, a meeting or a presentation or whatever, like part of the clarity piece is, what do I want people to feel, know, do? Right? What are the results or the outcomes that I'm looking to achieve? So when you start with that, and then you would have to ask, which is, by the way, about vulnerability. Right? So you have to like build in these feedback mechanisms and these feedback loops and be willing to say, at the end of our conversation, hey, Jerome, I'm just curious what landed for you. Like if you were to paraphrase, or offer the highlights of this conversation to somebody else, what would those be? And you have to do this with as somewhat habitually, because if you only do it periodically, people are like, what's happening? Like, am I in trouble? But if you're just somebody who asks, and on a regular basis, honestly, it's the only way you're gonna know. You can look at action taken for sure, but you don't really know what else has happened, what other interventions might have happened. So, and it's easier, I think, to get feedback when it's one-on-one. It can be a little trickier when it's one-to-many, but the fundamental is the fundamental, which is you're going to ask what was received. What did you hear? What landed? What did you take away?
I like that. I think we live in a culture now where a lot of people aren't interested in getting feedback. Like they fear feedback, right?
It's terrifying.
I think as leaders, sometimes people are scared to give feedback. because
Yes.
they're worried about the consequences.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
how are you
Yes.
guiding people through that part of the?
Yeah, this is such an important question. I mean, part of this depends on the culture in which you are operating, right? So I just want to really say there are some cultures where asking for feedback, if you're the only one doing it in this like informal, this is just part of what I do type of way, you know, it doesn't work in all cultures. However, naming it when you first start doing it, like if you feel like there is enough safety for you as a leader to start doing this, naming it, like, you know what, I've identified communication as something I really want to improve, and notice what is being modeled here. Like if you think of the leader and, you know, somebody who reports to this person, what they've just allowed is like, it's okay not to have it all figured out all the time. So I really want to improve my communication. I want to make sure that I am supporting you to the greatest extent possible. And communication is so key. And I'm not sure I'm awesome at that, or, you know, whatever, however you're going to say it. So it's your words. So I just want to let you know, this is a me thing, but I need your help. I need your help. And so just know that as we go forward, we don't need to start this today. If you're open to it, great. But going forward, I'm going to be asking for your feedback. And I know that can be a little weird and frankly scary because I am your supervisor, insert word. But please know your input will make me a better leader. And I appreciate that in advance. And it will never be used against you. I genuinely want to hear it. And you got to be in a space of, I genuinely want to hear it. And, you know, it should be your words about how you want that experience to be, but you need to acknowledge their role in it and acknowledge positional authority and psychological safety as you introduce this new habit.
I think the single best thing I did to become a better communicator was insert the acknowledgement part.
Oh, yeah. Acknowledgement is key.
Because I just move on to the thing, right? Well, that's what I used to do. It was, hey, da 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 da. Okay. Well, we're gonna fix it. And it's like, wait, what? I've got feelings and like
Yeah. So I just learned this from another female entrepreneur. And I hadn't actually thought about it as like a practice, like acknowledgement as a practice. But that's sort of what we were talking about. And, you know, some folks do it naturally, other folks, it, you know, comes because you realize the power of it. But what she shared, which really resonated with me, and I just hadn't quite thought about it this way, is I could say to you, Jerome, today in this moment, what do you want to be acknowledged for? What can I acknowledge you for?
Yeah.
And then genuinely, what can I acknowledge you for, Jerome, today? What's on your heart?
Curiosity.
Jerome, I really want to acknowledge, and I've truly noticed this about you, I acknowledge that you really value curiosity and you bring out the best aspects of people. I acknowledge that.
That feels good.
Right?
Yeah.
When she first said it, I was like, that seems really contrived. She's like, let's give it a whirl. And then now I've started to like adopt it as a practice. It's powerful. Like you knew that I was going to acknowledge because I told you. And
I told you what to do and you did it and it was amazing. I think so many people are scared. I know for me in particular, there will be times that I don't ask because I don't want the person to say no.
yeah.
And I remember last week I was in situations where I knew I could help people and I didn't tell them that I could help them.
Mm.
And I felt all kinds of conflict on the backside of that. I felt out of alignment. I felt incongruent.
Mm.
And it was only because of my ego and me being worried that the person would be like, no, you can't. Or what if you, how prove it? Like, and all of those things. And that's not accurate. Like, that's not the answer.
Well, but that was just you being human, right? Because underneath all of those hypothetical, prove it, how do you do that, blah, 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 is like a fear of rejection.
For sure.
Right? And what we all want is acceptance, which is a high bar, and belonging.
So let's go there. Since you bring those words in, acceptance. How does communication help people get to that place? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's necessary, right? If I'm going to show you that I accept you, I've got to communicate that message to you.
Yeah. It starts with self-acceptance. I mean, fundamentally, the only person who needs to accept you, well, not fundamentally, and not the only, but the first person that has to accept you is you. And I actually think that's your toughest customer. So before, it's actually much more comfortable to go external, and when you're not going to be universally accepted. I mean, if you think about it, like, do you like everybody you meet? No, right? And so everyone's not going to like you. That's totally okay. Right. So I think being very intentional about both in what spaces is it important to you to feel accepted, and then why? Why is it important for you to feel accepted in those spaces? And that allows you to show up, right, in a way and use communication in a way that serves you and serves the people who you're with. I think acceptance is a really interesting concept for leaders to think about, because when you hold positional authority, I wonder if it's as much about accepting the person as it is about being clear on expectations and results. Like, is it about the method or is it about the outcomes? I may not love how somebody does something, but I'm a very results driven leader. Like, if you want to do this thing in a way that I'm like, I don't even know what you're doing, which sometimes happens, I have to, because I've said to them, however you want to get to the result, as long as you're doing no harm along the way, of course, that's kind of up to you, but that's not how everybody leads. So I think that there is a piece about, are you process focused or results focused? And they're not linear. It's sort of a polarity to a certain extent, but what's your balance between those things, right? And how are you managing expectations? But as a leader, you're going to probably have to lead people, manage people who I think that's an individual choice around acceptance. So it's acceptance of results. It's acceptance of the person. What are you or who are you accepting?
So that part is interesting, because I see a lot of people believe that they are the work. They are the results. And that's not true. And if I reject the results, then I reject them as a person. That's not true. This isn't good. This isn't your best work. And it's, I see it more with my kids than anything else, because they're at the age where pleasing is really important for them. And so if, like, my daughter got a B on her report card, and I was like, you're an A student. What are you doing? And she said, well, blah, blah. I was like, did you do your best, though? And she's like, I did not. And I said, so it's reflective of your effort, but is it worth the effort to get a true reflection in the grades of what you do? And I think we got through that one well, but I know plenty of other situations where I didn't get through it well. And you said that you use the word leader broadly, and I just think leadership exists everywhere.
Yeah.
Anytime somebody's looking for us to help them get a result, we're leading. Right. And, it's not just in the workplace. It's not at home. It's everywhere you go. A leader's a leader's a leader, whether they have the positional authority or not.
Well, it's why I like thinking about leading as opposed to being a leader. I mean, one is about doing and one is about being and identity. So I just think it feels different, and I approach it differently when I think about leading as a verb.
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes drop. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatchers. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show. We do have. So you talked about being versus doing. You brought it up, and you choose your words intentionally, so it wasn't just the thing. Can we go deeper for the listeners here? Because it's a really important concept from my perspective.
Yeah, it's important.
What is the difference between being and doing?
To me, doing are things that can change over time in more rapid succession. And I'll come back to an example. Whereas being is about at your core, who are you? And that can also shift over time. I mean, you do a lot of really beautiful work around identity and self-image. So that there can be overlap. Like you can do enough things so that you become someone who does these things. But I think being is much more about identity, and doing is about roles and action.
So being the person, identity. Who determines our identity?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this to me is the fundamental question about who's authoring your life. So are you going to identify your own identity, or are you going to allow others? And sometimes it's not up to you. So not all the things are up to you. So, focus on the things that are. And I would say if you're somebody who wants to shift your identity and via maybe your self-image, there's a universe of things that you can and can't control. So I think there's some external. I think where the scales tip is that we're kind of socialized to give away all of our power and to let others almost entirely define who we are, as opposed to that clarity of who we want to be. And I say this as someone, I just want to be clear about my positionality, right? Like I hold a title of professor. The way I view that, I mean, that comes with so much privilege, a little bit earned, mainly unearned, right? But it comes with just a whole collection. And what that means, and to me, that's about something I do, but it's not who I am. However, it holds so much, it's so charged that when I am in certain spaces, I have to be mindful of that is who I am in that space. I am a professor, right? And so when the identities are loaded like that, I think that's some of the work of being really aware of what it comes with, and which pieces you own and don't own in that.
So you're working with leaders in businesses. They have this positional authority.
Mm-hmm.
What do you teach them about titles? Do you teach them to put them away? Do you teach them to show up with them? Is that part of the messaging? Like, that's interesting.
Yeah, it also depends on the culture of the organization. So I work with purpose-driven clients. So they're in foundations and nonprofits, but my common denominator with all my clients is they very fundamentally want to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. However they want to do that, that takes on a lot of shapes. So, I say titles have different meaning in different contexts. And for me, part of it is like, maybe that title really, it's important to you, right? And you want to take it on as part of your identity. So there's that balance of like, what do I want to take on? Like I worked hard to become, a director or a CEO or whatever it is. Like I want to fully own that. And others are like, I feel, maybe they have a less hierarchical structure and that can actually work against them. So I go back to like, if we're looking at results, how do you want to think about the titles that come with your current position and what's going to lead to service and success? Like just always coming back to that. And then I work a lot around personal purpose, and get, helping my clients get grounded in like, what is your purpose? I'm sure you do this work as well. And that's when doing that, this is a moment where it can be helpful to come back to that.
But the titles usually are bestowed from external. We talked about internal versus external. Do you have any thoughts around communicating with yourself?
Yeah. What does it mean to you? I mean, I really had to do the work on this around, because I've taught for a really long time. So, I refer to myself as a pracademic, which is a practitioner and an academic. So I've taught in a bunch of capacities and didn't have the title of professor in my title. So I've experienced doing very similar work, the doing, as oh my gosh, I don't even know how many, lecturer and senior lecturer and guest and, all these things. And then there was a transition, so get external, where for a lot of actually excellent reasons, they created a track, which was a teaching professor track. And so my title changed like literally overnight. And so I really had to reflect on, I'm doing the same thing. I'm the same person. How is this going to show up and how I show up? And the thing about the term professor is it's shorthand, right? So it's like an easy thing to say, like, what do you do? Well, I'm a professor. And, but I realized that actually stalled out a lot of conversations. It wasn't an invitation for the conversation to go further. It actually stopped people because they're like, oh, now, whatever. They're like, end up having all their feels like you're a professor. I'm like, it's not like that. And I like kind of had to a little bit explain it away. So you have to do the self-reflection first. Because it is given to you. The titles are given to you. I mean, this is a classic example. It was just literally, they flipped a switch and I had a different title.
That doesn't sound like fun. And I mean, I'll never forget somebody telling me I had to lay half of my team off and how I felt like all the control or all the power I had being evaporated in that instant.
Yeah, but this is an example of, from a title perspective, I got a title promotion because of the currency of it. So it sort of elevated to me the amount of unearned privilege that came along with my title. And that was part of what I had to grapple with. So, sometimes it can be additive and other times it goes in the other direction.
So how did you get here? Like what was the journey? Because I mean, the depth of work that you had to do isn't something that most people are willing to do. And then to go out into the world and work with the folks who are on a mission, they're working in their purpose and on purpose. Mm-hmm. It just takes it to a different level. So how did we arrive here?
Yes, how did we arrive here, Jerome? It's a great question. I always joke like I need to come up with a more linear response to this. But then I realized maybe it's freeing for people to understand that most paths to wherever we land are not linear. It wasn't like I wasn't catching a dream. I didn't like set out to be a pracademic and to sort of be a communication expert. I'll say one of the things that definitely left an imprint on me is that, so I was born in Vancouver, Canada, and we moved down to American parents. So I'm American, born in Canada, to American parents. But I did kindergarten through grade 2 in French immersion. So although I, at home spoke English and a lot of school spoke English, I could only read and write in French. So we moved down the summer between grades 2 and 3, and my mom spent a lot of time teaching me how to read and write in English. But I have very distinct memories of the first days of grade 3. And the teacher thought it'd be a fantastic idea to have me sing the Canadian national anthem in French. Yeah, if you would ever like to feel very alienated very quickly and like you have sprouted 3 heads all at the same time, I recommend this approach, seriously, and then we went on to recess and kids were like, oh, I don't know about that. Who's she? But I had this sense of urgency around learning English, reading, writing English. And this goes back to belonging. Like I didn't want to be weird. I wanted to belong. And I had this professor who referred to this as, do you remember the show in like the 90s, Alf?
Sure.
Okay. So for listeners who are not familiar, Alf was an alien and he looked like, not like a green alien, but he was like a cartoon,
Wow.
like
yeah,
like a brown aardvark kind of. So he looked very different, but he talked and acted exactly like an American teenager. And so this professor referred to Alf syndrome, which is like you externally look different, but in every other way, you were like whatever the group is. And then there's reverse Alf syndrome, where, for listeners you can't see, I'm blonde hair, blue-eyed, white woman, white kid at the time. So I looked, I fit in terms of appearance. And then I opened my mouth and I was like, I just didn't know quite how to navigate. And I felt very othered. And so like, I think I developed a very early, deep appreciation for the power of language and how it can be currency and how it can help you navigate and create a sense of belonging. I was just always drawn to words. I grew up, everybody thought I'd be a lawyer. I thought I'd be a lawyer. I was going to do international law. And then I worked for lawyers and was like, that doesn't seem as fun as I thought. But that even was driven by like, it seemed like a way where I could use my skills and make the world a better place. And so, then there were some twists and turns in the roads. So I moved back up to Canada. Then I came back down to the University of Washington and got my master's degree in public administration. And there was this really interesting moment where I'm still very good friends with all the people who were here for this conversation. They don't remember this conversation, but it was really pivotal for me, which is we were about to finish. We were like months away from finishing our master's degrees. And we were talking about what are we going to do next? And in my mind, I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. I've done a bunch of interesting stuff, I guess. I don't know. And then one woman turned to me and said, well, you're so lucky, Erica, because it's so obvious what you'll do. And I was like, is it? What I literally was like, what am I going to do? She's like, well, you're going to do something in communication and marketing. And I was like, and everybody was like, oh, clearly, lots of head nodding. Clearly, you're going to do something with communication and marketing and words and language. And I was like, okay, that seems like a good idea. That seems like a good idea. And so I did. And it's just, it's ebbed and flowed. And but I haven't had like I want to do this, even becoming a consultant and a strategist for my clients. I thought that was 19 years ago. And I know that because I was pregnant with my daughter, who is now 18 and a half. And I was 6 months pregnant, and I was working for a nonprofit and was summarily let go with no warning at 6 months pregnant. Yeah. And that, for somebody who a lot of my identity was around achieving and achievement and external validation, that took me, really years to get over. It was so damaging. And in retrospect, just a sort of business decision and literally had nothing to do with me. We can go into it. But so I started, as soon as people found out, they're like, ooh, can you help us? Like, I was a good writer, a good communicator. Will you do this? And I thought, well, I'll do this for a bit. And then after I'd done that for like a year and a half, I was like, maybe this is a thing. Maybe I'll just keep doing this. And so that's how that happened. And then somebody invited me to teach. So I started teaching. Yeah. And then I got progressively geekier about language because I think in terms of the confidence piece, it's not confidence like swagger that matters to me at all for my clients. It's really self-confidence. But that doesn't have as nice of a ring to it, by the way. I help clients communicate with clarity and self-confidence. It doesn't. But a big piece of it is self-confidence, whether or not that's at the individual level for the leader or the organizational level, just that sense of like, this is who we are. This is who we are. And I know how to talk about that. And I know how to communicate about that. I love research. I do my own research, and I'm always looking for, new research that I can share. So I just kind of got progressively geekier on the whole thing because it seemed fun. That's might be a good time. I was talking this class, I was teaching this a couple years ago, and I really love the book, The Secret Life of Pronouns, for anyone who's interested, by James Pennybaker, a wonderful scholar. And so we were talking about the book, and I get like this all amped up. And when my students deadpan says, Erica, I think you need to get out a little bit more. I will never forget that. I was like, okay, it's probably a fair point.
Yeah.
So it's not, I've always felt called to do my part to make the world a better place, kind of intrinsically. And then, I think language, for the reasons I shared, always felt like a path to do that. But there wasn't like a grand master plan, for darn sure.
Well, I think there was. It might not have been yours, but it worked out.
That's fair, Jerome.
So you got a podcast.
I do. You were on my podcast. I love that conversation.
We'll tell the listeners a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is Communicate for Good. And it's really, it's an exploration of how can you use communication to make the world a better place, whether that's you communicating as a leader, as a team, as an organization. Because my premise is that it starts with self, for sure. Your first cause, it starts with you. So, but when you're thinking about communicate for good, the bar that I invite people to try to reach, or at least wonder about, is how can I communicate so it's for the good of myself, the good of my team, the good of the organization, and the good of the world. And the first three of those, that's the ripple effect out to the world. So if you can keep an integrity with that at each level, then by extension, it goes out to the world. So we go over, it goes in a lot of different directions. Some of it's like brass tacks, I have a method, and we're going to go back to the Claxon method. What does success look like? Who's your target audience? How are you going to reach them? Whether or not your target audience is, somebody you're supervising, or a much bigger audience. So some of it's brass tacks, but it's a larger exploration of what role can language play in the work of making the world a better place.
I love it. So what dream are you most focused on catching next?
Identifying dreams proactively is kind of new territory for me. I know it's like I'm quite an ambitious, I would say in the positive sense of the word, I'm an ambitious person, but I think I've been very goal oriented, but I haven't allowed myself to be like, what is the next dream I want to catch? Right. But I have been reflecting on that. I had like a milestone anniversary last year, which starts with 5. And so that really does make you start thinking about life. And I realized like a lot of what speaks to me now is about memories and the memories that I'm creating. I don't know if that's a dream per se. Also, bringing communication baffles so many people, and yet to a great extent, it is a dynamic to be managed, not a problem to be solved per se. But there's so many things that, like, when you hear them, you're like, and then that self-confidence comes, right? And then you can speak with more clarity. And so helping even more people, like sort of service at scale, is a dream for me. Like, I don't want leaders wondering, I don't want them feeling badly about how they communicate, because it's not necessary. Like there is a skill set and a mindset, so one of the things I talk a lot about is that words matter because they are matter. Yes. Like anything you can touch in our universe, it's matter, right? So that we're like, well, of course my thoughts matter. So are words. And we sort of put words in a different category, and we put communication in a different category, but actually they abide by the exact same fundamental rules that any matter does, the rules of physics, the laws of physics and thermodynamics. And once you understand that, it's like, that's in, like, okay, now I'm going to think about, like, if you're writing an email and you're pressed for time, notice the first and last sentence. If you're even more pressed for time, notice the first verb and the last verb. Notice how you close it out, right? Just pay attention to the small, close to you things, because they will, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. So what are you putting out to the world? It's going to come back to you, right? And just getting in that habit of mind, right? That's not hard. It's truly not. Like, I've coached hundreds of people at this point, work for thousands of organizations, right? So I think that's what I don't know if it's a dream. Maybe I put in the dream category of like just a world where if you are on a mission to make the world a better place, you have access to that knowledge.
How will you know that you realized it?
I don't know. See, I don't know if it's quantifiable, because like the whole ding dang world is kind of big. Do I have to know that I've achieved it?
Well, I want to know that we made the dream a reality. So yeah.
Okay, then I'm gonna have to get back to you, because I would need to like.
No, it's in the moment. It is the thing. What is the thing? I'm challenging you today. This is the second challenge of the day. One off air, one on. Come on, give it to us. We're all cheering for you. What is it? There are no limits. You can have whatever you want.
Yeah, nonprofits are what speak to my heart. They're doing some of the hardest work on the planet with the fewest resources. So I work with big corporations too. But if all the nonprofits in the United States and Canada, like if they didn't have to wonder where to go for that knowledge, that'd be amazing. That's how I could bind my dream a little bit in that way.
So does that mean that you're the best marketed communication expert in the world? Like, what does that mean?
I think it means that my company, Claxon, is the go-to resource, and that there's no mental energy, right? Like I think a lot about resource allocation in terms of time, energy, attention, just, resource allocation. I don't want them to have to, I want them to be able to allocate their resources to the learning and not the where am I going to learn it. Because there's an opportunity cost, right? Like if I have to go forage, that takes time and energy.
You have such a heart for people. It's amazing. So I always wrap up these interviews with the question. And some people say it's hard, others don't. I think you'll say it's not. What's the one thing you want the listeners to take away from that?
That they already know how to communicate exactly how it's going to feel amazing to them. And they just need a little nudge in that direction. And that like you used the word congruence, Jerome, a lot. And I love that word. I think it feels very far away for a lot of people. And I know that there's a lot of sort of guilt and shame for both leaders and organizations about like, we're not doing this well. We could always be doing it better. And I want them to hear you're right where you need to be. You're right where you need to be. You're always right where you need to be. You're perfect just as you are. And you can learn this. If this is up for you, you can learn how to be even better at communicating. And you get to define what better means. Like maybe it's congruence. Maybe it's that you want to get, be able to speak in front of a large crowd. Whatever that means to you, you can do it. I'm yet to meet a person or an organization who, once they set the intention and they get the support they need and deserve, they can't do it.
Erica, you are a dream catcher. Thank you so much for joining us on this show. And I look forward to Claxon being the go-to place for all nonprofits to help with their messaging and help with their leadership without having to think about it. It is just on tap. You're on speed dial. You're gonna have to hire some more folks, but I think you'll be up for the challenge.
I call that a high-class problem. Thanks, Jerome. I love what you're doing. I love the invitation to dream and to think bigger than at least I know I do on a daily basis oftentimes. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll talk soon.